There are moments in history when the universe seems to hold its breath, when entire civilizations stand at the edge of extinction, and the choices made echo across the stars for generations. This is the story of such a moment, when humanity faced its darkest hour, not from an enemy horde, but from those who had once called themselves allies. Captain Rebecca Torres never imagined her career would end like this, in a political chamber millions of light years from home. She had trained for space combat, for tense diplomatic negotiations, for first contact scenarios with unknown species. But standing here in the Apex Council chamber, watching her entire species being erased from the galactic survival equation, she felt utterly unprepared. As a veteran officer, she had seen her share of battle. She wore the scars from the Proxima incident and carried the memories of friends lost to the cold, unforgiving void. Her dark eyes had witnessed the stunning beauty of nebula births and the unimaginable horror of planetary bombardments. Yet nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the cold, detached calculation she was witnessing today. The enemy was the Vorgoth swarm. For 32 years, they had been consuming entire worlds. They weren't invaders in the way we usually think of them. They were more like a force of nature, a plague of biological machines that converted all organic matter into more themselves. Every planet they touched became a twisted hive world, pulsing with new warriors, ready to spread even further into the galaxy. The Galactic Coalition, a union of hundreds of species, had fought them system by system, but they were losing ground with each passing month. High Arbiter Kelvin Thane, humanity's chief representative to the Council, stood beside Captain Torres. The silver-haired diplomat had spent decades building relationships and forging alliances across the galaxy. He was the one who negotiated Earth's entry into the Coalition 15 years ago, securing promises of mutual defense and shared prosperity for all. Now he was watching those promises turn to dust. Around them, the vast chamber buzzed with the sounds of hundreds of different species, each advocating for their own survival. The Xanathi, ancient crystalline beings, argued with cold mathematical precision. The Keltharian warriors, a species that valued honor above all else, spoke of grim tactical necessity. Even the Luminary Collective, beings of pure energy who rarely involved themselves in physical matters, had sent observers, their golden forms flickering with what looked like concern. At the center of the massive ring-shaped station, Supreme Coordinator Vex Thrane of the Antarian Sovereignty activated the main holographic display. A three-dimensional map of the galaxy rotated slowly, showing the cancer-like spread of red zones. Each crimson marker represented a system consumed by the Vorgoth. The Outer Wind territories, where humanity had established most of its colonies, glowed with ominous warning indicators. And there it was, Earth itself, sitting vulnerable in Sector 7-9, far, far away from the proposed new defensive line. The Exodus Protocol represents our only viable survival strategy, Vex Thrane announced, his voice carried by translation matrices to every being present. The Antarians were bureaucrats by nature, a species that had elevated administration to an art form. They saw the galaxy not as a collection of peoples and cultures, but in terms of resources, probabilities, and acceptable losses. Our quantum analysis arrays have processed 7 million tactical scenarios, he continued. The conclusion is irrefutable. We must consolidate our forces behind a defensive perimeter we can actually hold. A thick blue line suddenly appeared on the map, cutting through the galaxy like a surgeon's blade. Everything outside that line, over 4,000 inhabited systems, was shaded, gray, abandoned, sacrificed. Torres felt her hands clench into fists as she watched Earth and all her sister worlds disappear into that gray zone. 47 human colony worlds gone from protection, 200 billion souls condemned. This is genocide by abandonment. Kelvin Thane's voice rang out, sharp and clear across the silent chamber. Every translator carried his words with perfect clarity. You are asking humanity to stand alone against an enemy that has broken the combined might of 200 civilizations. You gave us promises of mutual defense. We joined this coalition in good faith. We contributed our ships, our resources, our people to fight this threat. And now, when we need you most, you draw a line that leaves us on the wrong side? A Delothian representative, an insectoid being, rose to respond. Its mandibles clicked as it spoke. Ambassador Thane, we understand your distress, but emotional appeals cannot override tactical reality. The human territories are simply too far from the core systems. Defending them would require extending our supply lines across hostile space. The resource expenditure would weaken the entire defensive network. We would lose everything by trying to save everyone. Then what was the point of any of this? Kelvin Thane shot back, his voice filled with righteous anger. What good is a galactic civilization that sacrifices its members the moment they become inconvenient? What separates us from the Vorgoth if we start practicing selective survival? The Xanathi High Observer projected its thoughts into the debate. Its crystalline shards rotated in a complex, mesmerizing pattern. The distinction, Ambassador, is that we choose who survives based on mathematical optimization rather than random consumption. It is the difference between managed triage and universal death. Unpleasant, but necessary. Torres watched Kelvin Thane's shoulders sag just slightly. She had seen that look before, on the faces of soldiers who knew a battle was lost, but were determined to keep fighting anyway. And in that moment, the veteran captain knew she couldn't stay silent. She stepped forward, her crisp military uniform a stark contrast to the flowing robes and exotic forms all around her. I have a question for this august assembly, Torres said, her voice cutting through the low murmur of 1,000 private conversations. When the Vorgoth reach your new defensive line, and believe me, they will, what happens then? Do you draw another line, a little further back? Abandon another tier of civilizations? At what point does the mathematics say that you, personally, are an acceptable loss? A profound silence fell across the chamber. The question hung in the recycled air like a pointed accusation. Supreme Coordinator Vex Thrane's expression remained perfectly neutral, a mask of bureaucratic indifference. Captain Torres, your point is noted, but irrelevant. The current defensive calculations account for holding the line indefinitely, given proper resource allocation. Your hypothetical scenario only exists if we fail to implement the Exodus Protocol. By refusing to make these hard choices now, we guarantee that exact outcome. Hard choices, Torres repeated, the bitterness of the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Is that what we call it when we sentence billions to death? I wonder if it will still seem like a hard choice when you are safe behind your precious blue line, sipping whatever it is your species drinks, while human children watch the sky burn. The holographic display shifted again, now showing force projections and supply chain analyses. The Antarians and their love for charts and graphs. Torres watched as her entire species was reduced to a series of logistical equations. The human military contribution was assessed at a meager 0.03% of total coalition forces. Human industrial output ranked somewhere below 50 other species. Their genetic diversity offered limited xenobiological research value. In the cold, hard calculus of survival, humanity simply did not provide a sufficient return on the investment required to defend them. Kelvin Thane tried one last, desperate appeal. He spoke of human innovation, of the breakthroughs in quantum computing and medical technology that Earth scientists had contributed. He reminded the Council of the human soldiers who had died defending coalition worlds, of the merchant marines who kept vital supply lines open, of the diplomatic corps who had successfully mediated disputes between historically hostile species. Every contribution was politely acknowledged, praised, and then dismissed as insufficient to alter the fundamental equation. As the debate dragged on, Torres noticed something that chilled her more than any Vorgoth attack ever could. Many of the council representatives weren't even paying attention anymore. They had already made their decision. This was all just theater, a performance to give the appearance of due consideration before executing a predetermined outcome. The Exodus Protocol would pass. Humanity would be abandoned. And all these ancient, supposedly enlightened civilizations would sleep soundly at night, knowing they had made the logical choice. When the vote was finally called, the result was overwhelming. Of the 248 member civilizations, 212 voted in favor of the Exodus Protocol. 29 abstained, a coward's vote. Only 7 voted against it, and most of those were minor species who likely feared they'd be on the wrong side of the next line drawn on the map. As the council chamber slowly emptied, Torres and Kelvin Thane stood alone at the human delegation's platform. The massive holographic display still showed the galaxy, cruelly divided between salvation and sacrifice. Somewhere out there, in that vast gray zone of the abandoned, families were eating dinner, children were playing, people were living their lives, completely unaware that the galaxy had just decided they were expendable. What do we tell them? Torres asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. What do we say to 200 billion people who trusted us to keep them safe? Kelvin Thane stared at the holographic map for a long, silent moment before he finally turned to her. We tell them the truth, he said, his voice now devoid of its earlier anger, replaced by a steely resolve. That the galaxy abandoned us. And then we tell them something else. That humanity has never needed anyone else's permission to survive. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content just like this. See you next time. 48 hours. That's how long it took for the death sentence of humanity to cross the void and reach Earth. Rebecca. Torres watched her home planet grow from a star into a swirl of blue and white through the viewport of the transport ship. 5 years ago, she'd left as a captain, filled with the fiery hope of carving out humanity's destiny among the stars. Now, she was just a messenger, carrying news that would extinguish that fire for good. The emergency session of the United Earth Assembly was a whirlwind, convened just hours after her arrival. The Grand Hall in Geneva, a place that had witnessed countless debates shaping humanity's future, was about to host its last and most desperate one. Prime Director James Okonkwo, his voice a deep baritone that carried the gravity of decades of leadership, called the session to order. He was the man who had guided humanity into the Galactic Coalition. Now, he had to guide them through their expulsion. Members of the Assembly, governors of the colony worlds, citizens watching across our systems, Okonkwo began, his face a mask of solemn duty. We face a moment that will define our species for generations to come. The Galactic Council has voted to implement the Exodus Protocol. As of today, all 48 human worlds lie outside the designated defensive perimeter. We have been deemed an acceptable loss. Chaos erupted. The hall became a cacophony of shouts, questions, and demands for answers. On the massive screens flanking the podium, faces from Mars, Europa, Titan, and dozens of fledgling colonies showed a spectrum of raw emotion, from pure, unadulterated rage to the hollow-eyed stare of despair. Governor Patricia Mendez of New Columbia, humanity's largest colony beyond the Sol system, was on her feet, tears cutting paths down her cheeks. You're telling me that 17 million colonists have been sentenced to death? That 3 generations who built a civilization from nothing are simply expendable? Her voice broke, a sound that echoed the heartbreak of millions. Kelvin Thane, the diplomat who had represented Earth on the council, stepped forward. His usual composure was gone, replaced by the visible cracks of failure. Governor Mendez, the council has offered evacuation assistance. They will provide transport for essential personnel and genetic samples. They suggest we preserve what we can of human culture and genetic diversity for future reconstruction. Should the war turn in their favor? Essential personnel. The words were repeated, dripping with contempt. It was Admiral Harold Chun, the stoic commander of the Earth Defense Fleet. He was a man forged in the crucible of war, having fought in every major engagement since humanity joined the coalition. They want us to choose who lives and who dies, to abandon our worlds and beg for refugee status, scattered across their so-called protected systems. Is that their offer? That is the offer, Thane confirmed, his voice barely a whisper. A new voice cut through the despair. It was Minister of Science Elizabeth Foster, her mind a relentless engine of problem-solving. What are our military options? Can we mount an independent defense? All eyes in the hall and on the screens turned to Admiral Chun. The old warrior's fingers danced across his personal interface, projecting tactical displays for everyone to see. The human fleet consists of 83 capital ships, 247 cruisers, and about 1,500 smaller vessels. We have decent manufacturing, but limited access to the exotic materials needed for advanced weapon systems. Our soldiers are well trained. Our tactics are innovative. But against the Vorgoth? He paused, the silence stretching, heavy and suffocating. Every coalition engagement has shown that you need a 10-to-1 force ratio to successfully repel a Vorgoth assault. We would be facing them alone. No support fleets, no supply networks, no shared intelligence. Mathematically, we cannot win a conventional defensive war. The silence that followed was absolute, a void where hope had just been. On the screens, the colony governors' faces sagged with the finality of their doom. Then, a voice from the back of the chamber, unexpected and clear. Admiral Chun said we cannot win a conventional defensive war. I would like to propose that we stop thinking conventionally. Every head turned. It was Dr. Leonard Park, head of the Advanced Weapons Research Division. Park was a maverick, a man known for radical ideas that often got him into trouble. He'd been officially reprimanded twice by coalition committees for research they deemed too dangerous. For the past decade, Park continued, his voice gaining strength, we have been developing weapons under coalition guidelines. Guidelines that restricted certain approaches as too destructive, too unpredictable, too dangerous. The coalition called them war crimes waiting to happen, but they also called them potentially effective. Prime Director Okonkwo leaned forward, his eyes locked on the scientist. Dr. Park, are you suggesting what I think you are suggesting? I am suggesting, Park declared, his voice ringing with conviction, that humanity has been fighting with one hand tied behind its back. The coalition banned weaponized singularity generators. They outlawed quantum-plague devices. They forbade the development of self-replicating combat nanites and restricted AI beyond certain thresholds. They did this because they were afraid. They feared what could happen if such weapons fell into the wrong hands or got out of control. But we are already facing extinction. What exactly do we have to lose? The chamber exploded again, but this time it wasn't with despair. It was with a wild, desperate energy. A spark of defiance. Defense Minister Raymond Foster was on his feet. Our manufacturing facilities have been building coalition standard equipment, but our research labs, our labs have prototypes, concepts we were told to shelve. If we are truly on our own, then we answer to no one but ourselves. From a screen, Governor Thomas Wright of the Centauri colony spoke, his voice firm. Our system has been mining exotic materials for coalition use. We have stockpiles just sitting there, waiting for transport. If those resources stay with us, if we redirect everything to our own defense, we can field technologies we've only dreamed of. Rebecca Torres, the messenger of doom, suddenly found her own voice, speaking without conscious thought. The coalition taught us their tactics. We fought beside 100 species. We learned their strategies, their strengths, their weaknesses. We know how they think. And more importantly, we know how the Vorgoth fight, Because we've been studying them for 32 years. A new transmission patched through. The face of Colonel Vincent Reeves, commander of the Special Operations Division, filled the screen. My teams have been running covert ops in Vorgeth-occupied space. We have intelligence the Coalition doesn't. We understand their hive structure, their communication networks, their expansion patterns. If we stop trying to fight them the Coalition's way, if we develop our own approach, we might find weaknesses no one else has ever exploited. The mood in the hall had transformed. The air was no longer thick with the stench of defeat, but electric with the raw, untamed energy of a cornered species baring its teeth. They had been cast out, abandoned, and sentenced to die. The Galactic Coalition had made a grave miscalculation. They thought they were sacrificing a pawn. They had just unleashed a queen. The rules of war were about to be rewritten, not in the sterile halls of the Galactic Council, but in the fires of human ingenuity and desperation. The fight for survival had just begun. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the vastness of space. See you next time. The tone in the assembly chamber was changing. The despair was transforming into something else, something dangerous. Admiral Chun stood again, and Torres noticed something different in his expression. The resignation was gone, replaced by the fierce determination she had seen before battles. If we are going to do this, if we are truly going to stand alone, then we need to make decisions now. We need to consolidate our forces, redirect every resource, and we need to be willing to do things that will make the Coalition uncomfortable. This will not be a clean war fought by their rules. Prime Director Okonkwo looked across the assembly, reading the mood of the representatives. Let me be clear about what we are discussing. We would be abandoning the restrictions placed upon us by Coalition law. We would be developing weapon systems they consider abhorrent. We would be transforming our entire civilization into a war machine. There is no guarantee of success. In fact, the odds remain heavily against us. But the alternative is acceptance of death or dispersal as refugees. Show of hands. Who votes we fight? Every hand in the chamber rose. On the screens, every governor raised their hand. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would not go quietly into extinction. Kelvin Thane, who had spent his career building bridges to other species, spoke with a voice that carried no diplomatic softness. Then we need to send a message to the Council. They need to understand what they have unleashed. By abandoning us, they have freed us from their restrictions. They wanted to draw a line to protect themselves. We will draw our own line. And God help anything that crosses it. Dr. Park immediately began outlining research priorities. We can have prototype singularity weapons within 6 months. The quantum plague concept needs another year, but we can accelerate. The nanite swarms, those are tricky because of control. Issues, but if we are willing to accept some risk, we can field them within 8 months. And there is something else. Something we have been theorizing about, but never had the mathematical processing power to model properly. What is it? Asked Minister Foster. The Vorgeth operate on a hive mind principle. They are all connected through some form of quantum entanglement communication. Every warrior, every ship, every hive structure is part of one massive distributed consciousness. The Coalition has been trying to kill them individually, which is why the war is going so poorly. You cannot defeat a hive mind by killing drones. You have to attack the network itself. Admiral Chun saw where this was leading. You want to develop a weapon that targets their communication network. Cut off the head and the body dies. Not exactly, Park corrected. I want to develop a virus. A digital weapon that spreads through their network and corrupts it. Turn their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. Make their interconnected nature the vector for their destruction. The implications settled over the assembly. They were not just talking about fighting. They were talking about innovation in warfare. about unleashing technologies that other species had feared to develop, about becoming something the galaxy had never seen before. Rebecca Torres felt a chill run down her spine, but it was not from fear. It was from the realization that humanity was about to teach the galaxy a lesson. That sometimes the species you abandon becomes the one you should have feared. As the assembly session continued into the night, plans took shape. The defense fleet would consolidate around key systems. Manufacturing would shift entirely to military production. Research facilities would work around the clock on weapons development. Every human colony would become a fortress. Every citizen would contribute to the war effort. This would be total war. Not the limited conflicts the Coalition practiced, with their rules of engagement and humanitarian considerations. This would be survival warfare. Brutal, innovative, unstoppable, and somewhere in the protected sectors of the galaxy, the species who had voted to abandon humanity would soon learn that there are things more dangerous than the Vorgith. There are desperate humans who have nothing left to lose and everything to prove. 6 months passed like a storm across human space. Every shipyard worked without rest. Every research facility pushed beyond what anyone thought possible. Every colony transformed into something the galaxy had never witnessed. The change was not just military. It was fundamental. Humanity was rewriting its own story. Rebecca Torres stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned warship Defiance, watching her crew run final systems checks. This vessel bore no resemblance to the Coalition standard ships she had commanded before. Every line of its design spoke of human innovation freed from restriction. The hull incorporated stealth technology the Coalition had banned as unfair. The weapon systems included modifications that made their engineers uncomfortable. And at its heart sat an artificial intelligence that exceeded every limit the Council had imposed. Captain Torres, all systems are functioning at peak efficiency, the ship's AI announced. Its voice was calm, but carried an undertone of something almost eager. Humanity had named it Athena, after the goddess of wisdom and warfare. Unlike the limited AI permitted by Coalition law, Athena could think, adapt, and learn. She was not just a tool. She was a crew member. "Thank you, Athena. How are you feeling about our mission?" Torres asked, knowing the question itself would have horrified Coalition observers. "I am experiencing what I believe humans would call anticipation, Captain. I was created to protect humanity. I intend to excel at my purpose." Across human space, 50 ships like Defiance were completing their trials. But they were just the visible edge of humanity's transformation. In hidden facilities throughout the Sol system, Dr. Leonard Park supervised the final testing of weapons that would make the Vorgith seem merciful by comparison. The quantum plague sat in containment, a disease that could unravel matter at the subatomic level. The singularity generators waited in their magnetic bottles, ready to create miniature black holes inside enemy vessels. And the crown jewel of human innovation, the network Virus Park had theorized, was ready for deployment. But it was not just technology that had changed. Admiral Harold Shun watched training exercises on Mars, where human soldiers practiced tactics no Coalition manual would recognize. They trained to fight without mercy, to exploit every weakness, to win at any cost. The old rules of warfare that spoke of honorable combat and proportional response had been discarded. Survival recognized no honor except victory. The Vorgith came exactly when the predictive models said they would. A swarm fleet of 300 vessels emerged from quantum space at the edge of the Tau Ceti system, home to 12 million human colonists. The hive ships were massive organic constructs, pulsing with biomechanical life. Each one carried thousands of warrior forms, ready to consume another world. By Coalition doctrine, the defenders should have begun a fighting retreat, buying time for evacuation. Humanity had different plans. Torres received the alert aboard Defiance. All ships, this is Admiral Chun. The Vorgith have made their choice. Today we show them that humanity does not retreat. Today we teach the galaxy what happens when you leave humans with nothing to lose. Execute Operation Prometheus. The human fleet numbered only 40 vessels against 300 Vorgith ships. The mathematics that had doomed every coalition defense screamed that this was suicide. But the humans were not following the old equations. Defiance and her sister ships engaged their new drive systems, moving with a speed and agility that should have been impossible for vessels their size. The Vorgith swarm moved to intercept, expecting the conventional engagement patterns they had faced 1,000 times before. Instead, the human ships scattered, each executing independent attack runs that confused the hive mind's tactical predictions. Torres watched the battle unfold through Athena's distributed sensor network. Target their communication nodes. I want every shot disrupting their coordination. The AI complied instantly, directing fire with precision no human gunner could match. Singularity weapons lanced out, creating gravitational vortexes that pulled Vorgith ships into crushing embrace. The organic vessels, designed to regenerate from conventional damage, found themselves unable to repair rips in space-time itself. But the real attack was invisible. Colonel Vincent Reeves commanded a stealth ship that slipped through the chaos, releasing the network virus directly into the Vorgith communication stream. The virus was humanity's masterwork, a digital plague that spread through quantum entanglement faster than the hive mind could recognize the threat. Within seconds, it infected every Vorgith vessel in the system. Within minutes, it was spreading to every connected hive node across multiple star systems. The effect was catastrophic. Vorgith ships began firing on each other, their targeting systems corrupted. Warrior forms turned on their own hive structures, the commands in their genetic programming rewritten by the digital invasion. The hive mind that had been the Vorgith's greatest strength became the vector of their destruction. Throughout the battle space, the massive organic ships began to tear themselves apart from within. Torres watched in awe and horror as 300 enemy vessels were reduced to drifting biological debris in less than an hour. The human fleet had lost 3 ships, taken moderate damage on a dozen more, but achieved what the entire galactic coalition had failed to do in 32 years. They had not just defeated a Vorgith swarm. They had found a way to kill the hive mind itself. News of the victory spread across human space within hours, across the galaxy within days. The species that had written humanity off as an acceptable loss suddenly faced an uncomfortable reality. The desperate species they had abandoned had developed weapons and tactics that succeeded where the combined might of the coalition had failed. In the protected sectors behind the Exodus line, emergency sessions convened. Intelligence reports showed the extent of humanity's transformation, the weapons they had developed, the restrictions they had cast aside, the victories they were achieving against impossible odds. High Arbiter Kelvin Thane, who had returned to Earth after the Council's betrayal, received an urgent communication from Supreme Coordinator Vex Thrain. The Antarian's bureaucratic composure was gone, replaced by something close to panic. Ambassador Thane, a council requests immediate dialogue regarding technology sharing protocols. Your species has developed capabilities that could alter the course of the war. Kelvin Thane's response was cold. The council had its opportunity to stand with humanity. You chose mathematics over loyalty. Now you want us to share the innovations born from our desperation? Why would we help those who abandoned us? Because the Vorgith will eventually overwhelm even your new capabilities. Because united, we could drive them back. Because it is the right thing to do. Thane laughed, a bitter sound. The right thing. 6 months ago, the right thing was leaving 200 billion humans to die. Now that we have proven useful, suddenly cooperation is the right thing. I will take your request to our leadership, but I make no promises. The human leadership gathered once more in Geneva. The question before them was simple but profound. Would they share their technology with the species that had betrayed them? Would they allow the coalition back into the war they had already won the first major victory in? Prime Director James Okonkwo opened the floor for discussion. The debate was heated. Some argued that humanity should remain independent, let the coalition face the consequences of their choices. Others suggested that proving humanity's worth might secure a better future. Admiral Chun offered a different perspective. We should help them, but on our terms. We share technology slowly. We lead the military operations. We make them understand that humanity is not a junior partner to be discarded when convenient. We are a power in our own right now. If they want our help, they accept us as equals or they fight alone. The vote was close, but eventually humanity agreed to reopen dialogue with the Council. But it would be a new kind of dialogue. Not as supplicants seeking approval, but as a species that had proven its strength when abandoned. As a civilization that had stared into extinction and responded by becoming something more dangerous than the threat they faced. Rebecca Torres stood once more in the Apex Council chamber, but this time she did not stand at a podium as a representative seeking favor. She stood as the commander of the fleet that had achieved what none of them could. When she spoke, every species in the chamber listened. Humanity will share its technology. We will fight beside you again. But understand this. We remember who stood with us and who drew lines that left us to die. We remember which species voted for mathematics over loyalty. You wanted to save civilization by sacrificing its ideals. We chose to save both. Learn from that. The war against the Vorgoth continued, but it was no longer a losing battle. Human innovation, combined with coalition resources, began pushing the swarm back system by system. The network virus spread through the hive mind, creating chaos and confusion. The weapons humanity had developed gave the United Forces tools to actually kill the enemy rather than merely delay them. But more than the technology, it was the spirit that changed the war. Humanity had shown that desperation breeds innovation, that being abandoned can forge strength, that sometimes the species everyone writes off becomes the one that saves them all. In the years that followed, historians would mark the Battle of Tau Ceti as the turning point, the moment when humanity stopped being a minor species seeking acceptance and became a power that shaped galactic destiny. They would speak of the 6 months when humans worked miracles born from necessity. They would debate the ethics of the weapons developed and the tactics employed. But they would all agree on one truth. When the galaxy abandoned humanity, humanity responded by saving the galaxy anyway. Not because they had to, but because even in their darkest hour, humans chose to be better than those who had betrayed them. That choice, more than any weapon or victory, defined what it meant to be human.